Good afternoon. I am Osvaldo Golijov, a composer living in this area. And it is my immense pleasure and honor to welcome you to the second Norton lecture by Herbie Hancock. For those of you who know, a reminder, and for those of you who don't know, here comes an announcement. In conjunction with these lectures, the Harvard Film Archive will be screening 2 films featuring soundtracks by Herbie Hancock. Michelangelo Antonioni's Blow Up from 1966 will be screened on Sunday, February 23rd at 4:30 p.m. The next day, Herbie will attend and speak at the screening of Ivan Dixon's The Spook Who Sat by the Door, a film from 1973. That will be Monday, February the 24th at 7 p.m. Both screenings will take place at the Harvard Film Archive in the Carpenter Center, 24 Quincy Street. Herbie, last week you said that we cannot change the past nor the future, only the present. Well, it has definitely been a long present for you. A present that you have been changing for half a century, and that is how it should be. Picasso said that all great art lives in the present, and your music proves him right. It will continue to live in the present, in the future. Long after we are all gone, your music will keep sounding timeless. Yet, it will always remain of a time, now, and of a place, America. Your music is one of the gifts that our time and our place are leaving to the next generations. Unfortunately, among other not-so-great gifts, our generation leaves behind, but that's not your fault. So, if I had to choose one word to define your first lecture last week, that word would be courage. Courage to not call your series the poetics of jazz, but the ethics of jazz. Courage to not take shelter in your stature as a music giant, but to talk to us as a human being, communicating with other human beings. But why should we be surprised at your courage to redefine the scope of these lectures, when courage is one of the essential pillars of the ethics of jazz? After all, you must have great courage to create on the spot, in real time, something that did not exist in the world a moment ago. Courage to listen, to react in a constructive way, to dialogue, to explore uncharted territories together with musicians you may have known for a long time or may have just met. The ethics of jazz is indeed an ethics that could serve everyone who wants to make a difference in music and in life. Herbie, I was struck by your courage in not shying away from talking about the slavery roots, nurturing some of America's greatest music, and by walking us through the shameful acts of racism endured by some of our greatest artists. Beyond all that, you showed an even deeper courage by teaching us how to turn poison into medicine. And there was also great wisdom in your talk last week. I'm not talking only about the wisdom of Miles Davis, but about your own wisdom in structuring the talk as a jazz composition and performance, and at the same time as a Socratic dialogue. Of course, Miles' cryptic lines are much funnier than those by Socrates, and, like his music and yours, unforgettable. So, like everyone present here last week, I will remember until my last day both the butternotes and the Stockholm chord. The butternotes are the most perfect and concise explanation for every single revolution you and Miles caused in music, the reason for every time you questioned the status quo, for every time you broke the rules. What a great lesson for music and for life. Finally, there was the Stockholm chord. It haunts me, even if I have never heard it. I have burst into laughter so many times during this past week, imagining that scene, the quintet smoking like never before, you dropping that chord, your instant puzzlement and horror at what you had done, and that horror turning into wonder and gratitude an instant later, when Miles makes of that quote-unquote wrong chord an integral part of the music fabric. You taught us in such a powerful way how there are no wrong chords, only unexpected ones, and how everything becomes part of the music. I thought of your Stockholm chord dropping unexpectedly on the music, and at the same time of the moment millions of years ago when a huge meteorite fell in our planet. It exterminated the dinosaurs, but it did not exterminate life. Life just took a different path. It is clear that neither you nor Miles are dinosaurs. You are life. Your ethics, the ethics of jazz, are the ethics of life. And now, it is time for us to learn how and when to break the rules. Ladies and gentlemen, Herbie Hancock.
Thank you, Osvaldo. And my thanks and appreciation to everyone joining me this afternoon for my second lecture in the Ethics of Jazz series. Last week, we discussed the wisdom of one of my musical mentors, Miles Davis, a jazz composer, trumpeter, visual artist, and band leader, who had the courage to break the rules with his instrument and on the bandstand. One of the most innovative musicians of the 20th century, his stylistic revolutions influenced the development of bebop, cool, modal, and fusion jazz, and he continues to resonate and be an inspiration for millions of fans and musicians throughout the world. Miles had an innate sense for change, a prescience for identifying and collaborating with musicians who would become force fields in their own right, like John Coltrane, Bill Evans, my friend Wayne Shorter. And he personified the ethics of jazz. This week, I want to explore the idea of rule breakers. The rule breakers who choose wisely. The firebrands, rebels, revolutionaries, trailblazers, misfits, pioneers, mavericks, dreamers. Those men and women who during their lifetime dare to defy the establishment, question authority, and often ridiculed, vilified, ignored, or sometimes just tossed aside in the process. And their ideas were cultivated and advanced by the creative spirit, and their collective sparks ignited bonfires no one could ignore. For example, religious leaders such as Jesus, Moses, or Tsunesaburo Makiguchi. Makiguchi is the founder of the Soka Gakkai, the Buddhist religious organization that I belong to. Imprisoned in Japan during World War II as a thought criminal, he refused to bend his religious beliefs to an oppressive government and a corrupt religious culture that had given up on matters such as human rights. Jose Toda, his second in command, who was also in prison with him and who was mentored by Makiguchi, resurrected Soka Gakkai after the war. Because of his work and his mentorship of Daisaku Ikeda, who became the third president of Soka Gakkai, today, Soka Gakkai International is a world religion practiced in 192 countries with over 12 million members. I hope to see you on March 24th for my 5th lecture, Buddhism and Creativity, where I'll offer a little more in-depth discussion about my religious path. From Marilyn Monroe, who said, "If I had observed all the rules, I'd never have gotten anywhere," to the Dalai Lama, who remarked, "Know the rules well so you can break them effectively." Rules have played an integral part of our human evolution, either by their enforcement or their failure. But first, a caveat, because, well, what I'm going to say may be obvious, but it's imperative for me to state this before we get into the meat of the lecture. Since the subject of my lectures is ethics, I emphatically state that breaking the rules has to be done with a sense of responsibility. Otherwise, chaos ensues. And I think we already have enough chaos in the world today. Those who fracture or replace rules and work toward a common good to elevate and honor the human spirit are exemplary actors of the highest regard and set a high bar for humanity. Granted, there are imperative, indispensable rules that maintain order and promote security and civility. I know firsthand that too many traffic violations will result in you having to go to traffic school. I did. And of great importance, if you break a rule, there are consequences. So it requires ultimate courage to fight for what is ethical. The visionary Steve Jobs created a brilliant advertising campaign in the late 1990s called Think Different. You remember that? Yeah. In fact, Miles Davis was among those featured on billboards and promotional posters that hung on the walls in homes and dormitories around the world. Here's to the short version of the famous Apple quote. Here's to the crazy ones, the rebels, the troublemakers, the ones who see things differently. While some may see them as crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. In jazz, we improvise and quite often walk alongside the mainstream or run wildly off into the woods. So I know firsthand that it takes courage to challenge the established rules and think outside the box. That's an ethic that is shared also with my Buddhist faith. Irrevocable rules and laws that are firmly entrenched and difficult to change are sometimes wrong from the outset. For example, look at civil rights. From the arrival of the first slaves in the 1500s, it took over 300 years before the 13th Amendment abolished the tragedy and immorality of slavery, our country's original sin. Over 12 million African human beings were shipped to the New World, with approximately 11 million surviving the Middle Passage. Once on our shores, depriving slaves of last names made self-identity impossible. Racial subordination was unethical but inconceivably legal. Slaves were governed by slave codes and could be branded, whipped, imprisoned without a trial, and put to death by hanging, not to mention lynching, which was acceptable. Blacks had no rights, were considered to be chattel, savages, not people. It was true, even with the founding fathers of our nation, many of whom were slave owners. Enslaved black men, women, and children broke the rules of their captivity even while still in chains. Some broke free of the shackles and ran away. Others rebelled against their owners, most famously Nat Turner. Some sabotaged equipment, and many performed small daily acts of resistance, like slowing down work, which was economically harmful to the owners, and is a strategy that would later be used by labor unions. Unfortunately, although this had a long-term effect, it resulted in the prejudicial labeling of African Americans as lazy, because the slave owners failed to grasp the meaning of the rebellious activity. The spirituals, hymns, and work songs that channeled expressions of suffering and, most importantly, hopefulness during times of extreme hardship gave birth to the treasured musical art form called the blues and later rock and roll and jazz. These songs were also a secret code, a code used by the slaves to circumnavigate and break the owner's strict rules of servitude. The collective faith of the enslaved that had a better future lay ahead. This hope, coupled with strength of character, again, turned poison into medicine, a Buddhist term that is a perfect descriptive. It took over 3 centuries of bloodshed and a civil war before slaves and their descendants were given citizenship and second-class citizenship at that. Abraham Lincoln finally broke the rules and established the Emancipation Proclamation, and eventually, the rich cultural heritage of African American people was firmly enveloped, imprinted, and permeated into the history of our country. Many people have a tendency to demonize that which is threatening, different, or foreign to their opinions and beliefs. Socialism, communism, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Republicans, Democrats, atheists, lesbians, whites, blacks, Asians, women, men, and so on. And unfortunately, rules are often set up in a way that reflect the ignorance born from and supported by demonizing. Just take a look at the current state of our bipartisan political system to see this in action. Oh, maybe that's inaction. In my last lecture, I told you about the butter notes. But the first time I broke the rules in a more conventional way, I had to break the rules to uncover an unconventional way of playing. Immersing myself in an entirely new direction, I stretched way beyond the rules. The difference between putting my toe in the water or climbing up a steep precipice and diving off a cliff into the cold, deep, dark sea. In 1962, 1 year after I arrived in New York City, I was working and recording with Donald Byrd, trumpeters Kenny Dorham and Lee Morgan, alto saxophone player Jackie McLean, and guitarist Grant Green. So I was in good spirits and hard at work. I got a call from the alto saxophonist, bass clarinetist, and flutist Eric Dolphy, asking me to sign on for a short tour he was planning, which piqued my curiosity because at the time, Eric was one of the newer jazz musicians on the avant-garde jazz scene. I asked Eric about his approach, wondered if they had a set list of tunes, and if they used regular chord changes. I didn't know. And even though Eric replied affirmatively, it was puzzling why it never sounded that way to me. But I agreed to work with him and thought about how I would approach playing in this freer style. I soon learned that his music was deeply emotional, free, yet ingrained in the tradition of compositional structure. Eric has been astutely described as being, quote, too out to be in, and too in to be out. He was influenced by bebop, classical music, and 2 of my favorite composers, Bela Bartok and Igor Stravinsky. I decided that if I broke some of the rules of harmony, melody, and rhythm, that I might normally use in playing, it might open up many new paths for me to explore. And guess what? It actually worked. And it unlocked the door to endless landscapes and sonic journeys, ideas and techniques I continue to use to this very day. The band, J.C. Moses on drums, Eddie Kahn on bass, and Eddie Moore on trumpet, traveled to clubs from Buffalo to Philadelphia, playing this very weird music. And I could feel the baffled audience wondering, what the heck were they trying to accomplish? Some booed and some walked out. And although I did not have the verbal vocabulary or clarity to explain the music, I knew there was honesty in the direction we were pursuing. Even though their reaction made me feel unsure of what I was playing, deep down, something about this experimental cutting-edge sound stirred up a passion in me to defend our performance because I believed we were on to something important. Every night, we were in sync, having visceral musical conversations that often felt angry with screams of pain, but also had elements of sheer beauty, tranquility, and space. We broke all conventional rules. Often there were no steady beats. Sometimes the music would float along with no popular finger snapping capability. We were not tethered to any earthy conventional approach. We were musical astronauts. But in order to succeed, we not only had to walk down and conquer the tough, rugged path that lay ahead, we actually had to cut down the trees and create a brand new passage. This experience was like capturing lightning in a bottle, creating something forceful, ambiguous, magical, and then being able to hold on to it and reveal the treasure to the world. Rather than succumb to opposing and more comfortable forces, this was the first time I opted to defend and support not just our right to explore, but the value of our exploration with Eric Dolphy. The avant-garde and the music we were making also reflected the political and social climate of the times. This was the beginning of the civil rights movement. A boiling cauldron of dissatisfaction was stewing. Much of what we as Black Americans felt and experienced, the anger and pain, was expressed through our instruments and musical conversations. This was very similar to the vibrant hip-hop movement, which I embraced with my song, Rocket, that was to develop a decade later in the South Bronx. Musically with rap and turntablism, physically with breakdancing, and visually with graffiti. Music in general, and jazz specifically, has always reflected the times, while upholding a sense and view towards a hope-filled future. And I'm proud to say that we jazz musicians, the creators of the music and their disciples, were first. Looking back at the Eric Dolphy years, I understand that not only was this the first time I had to build and slip into a suit of battle armor, but truthfully, in a deeper sense, I recognized that the battle was really against myself. I had to make a choice of either quitting under pressure and returning to convention or diving off that cliff and swimming deeper into the unknown of that cold, dark sea. Although I started out tentatively in this new environment, I had to break my own rules. I turned a page in my personal history book, and my innate sense of curiosity, coupled with this new approach to exploration, two harmonious partners working together, helped me develop both musically and spiritually. I'm now known as a musician who constantly changes directions. And you know what? I do not exactly agree with that impression. Rather than getting rid of the old and in with the new, what I'm doing is collaging one experience into the next, which in itself is a kind of evolution. My golden rule is to keep breaking the rules. Keep doing the unexpected. Break through the comfort zone, but especially I now strive to create music that serves a purpose beyond myself, that engages with the world around me and upholds the ethics of jazz. You'll learn more about my cultural diplomacy initiatives in my next lecture. So, breaking the rules was a very significant and essential step in my development as a musician, but also, more importantly, in a non-musical sense. Thomas Edison said, "There are no rules here. We're trying to accomplish something." The experience with Eric Dolphy landed me in an environment that was unpopular, hated by many, strange to most, discordant, highly experimental, and not fully formed. Yet, I made a decision to fight for what we felt was honest and pure. I also had to fight when it came time to write and select the title of my composition, Watermelon Man, that appeared in my 1962 recording, Taken Off. First, a little history about the tune. Many of the pieces I've composed that have resonated with the greater majority of people that have heard my music start off with a simple idea. For example, Watermelon Man starts with one fairly long-held note, then 5 quick notes. Cantaloupe Island and Chameleon also have easy rhythmic foundations that are catchy and that's easy to remember. What made the difference compositionally for Watermelon Man was that I chose to capture a feeling and use a real person from my childhood as the star or source of the song. I finally remembered the sounds and rhythms of the wagon wheels on the horse-drawn carriage as it teeter-tottered down the uneven cobblestone back streets and alleyways in the south side of Chicago. That's the wagon wheels. Okay. I recalled his physical appearance and the song the vendor sang. Watermelon, red ripe watermelons for sale, or something like that anyway. That was not that much, it wasn't too melodic in a song sense. However, all the women would step outside on their back porches, lean over the railings, and yell to him, "Hey, Watermelon Man!" So I did that with the tune. Hey became that one long note, and the Watermelon Man became the next five. Hey, Watermelon Man. So I wrote Watermelon Man, an original song to help with record sales. Even though it was suggested I do a blues cover to increase attention. At that time, I felt audiences were responding positively to funky jazz. And since blues is part of my Chicago background, I began thinking about the great hard bop pianist and composer Horace Silver, who had this engaging, funky sound that I really admired. And he was also on Blue Note. Looking into my ancestral heritage and the black experience seemed like a good launching pad. And since jail or working in the fields picking cotton and singing work songs were not really a part of my big city Chicago background, I zeroed in on an ethnic character that I knew well, the Watermelon Man. In a way, this idea was a little bit ahead of its time. This was 1962, 6 years before James Brown wailed, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." And the idea of watermelons was not particularly stylish, and frankly, at that time, many black people were embarrassed to buy a watermelon in a white community because of this unrealistic stereotyping. But these were perceptions, and this was about to be a significant moment in my life. It took courage for me to use this title over a half century ago. But I mustered it up because I knew that there was nothing wrong with the Watermelon Man or with watermelons. I mean, it sounds ridiculous now, but back then, it was an issue. Why did Watermelon Man resonate with the general listening audience? Aside from the heartfelt animated character, the simplicity of the melody ignited observation, although I'm always looking for a simple reference, something that has held true throughout my entire career. There's always a complexity involved. But the simple germ, the nugget, the core of the piece makes it more powerful. It speaks to listeners' hearts and lives and holds their interests. There are a multitude of examples everywhere that you look and listen. Observe your neighbor's face. We're balanced and simple. 2 eyes, nose, mouth, 2 ears. But delve further, and we're utterly intricate. While the thread of my musical ideas may begin with a simple rhythm, the tempo and pulse of my life is a multiplex, and I like it. Exploring and creating manifold possibilities intrigues me, and combining, contrasting, antithetical ideas and choices can often result in a volcanic explosion of the fresh and unexpected. That's why I don't have a permanent band, and why I created the recording and its popular documentary possibilities. My innate curiosity, the same curiosity that had me taking apart clocks and watches when I was a little boy, made me a perfect candidate for my experience with the avant-garde jazz scene. And the spirit returned when I organized my band, Mwandishi, that recorded and performed between 1970 and 1973. And my album, Speak Like a Child, in a way, was a forerunner to Mwandishi. Speak Like a Child was an extension of Maiden Voyage. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm not striking out to build something new while discarding what I've done before. I'm layering, shaping, and molding, and spinning the new, the cutting edge, sometimes out of older material. Influenced by a long line of more established musicians, including Miles Davis, the cutting edge John Coltrane, and other little-known players, they all helped power and motivate the Mwandishi idea. Even contemporary and electronic musicians from the classical music scene like Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, John Cage, Igor Stravinsky, Bela Bartok, fed our experimental hunger. The musicians were impacted by more explorative approaches, and as the band began to stretch out, I too wanted to open up that sound a little more, which eventually evolved into a freer form of playing and arrangement. As opposed to the focus of Speak Like a Child, which I described as a forward look into what could be a bright future, the spirit of the band was a product of living in the turbulent times they are a-changing era. It felt like everything was up for grabs, including civil rights, women's lib, experimentation with mind-altering drugs, and the sexual revolution, including the beginning of the gay rights battle brought to life by Harvey Milk. Mwandishi united American and African cultures and rhythms, an assortment of musical genres and acoustic and electric sounds into experiments that were technologically, politically, and culturally relevant and propulsive. Jimmy Heath, a brilliant saxophonist and composer, has a son, Mtume, who joined us for a sound check when we were performing at Shelley's Manhole in Los Angeles and suggested we take on Swahili names that were characteristic of the band members. For example, I was given the name Mwandishi, which means writer or composer. Trumpeter Eddie Henderson became Mganga, which is a witch doctor. Bassist Buster Williams was Mchezaji, which meant the player, but we interpreted it as a gift, a title of his gift for gab, which he did have a way with the ladies. You know. Clarinetist and flutist Benny Maupin was Mwile, meaning the body of good health. Drummer Billy Hart was Jabali. And trombonist Julian Priester was called Pepo Mtoto. The band pioneered the use of electronics and synthesizers, and believe it or not, Patrick Gleason's monophonic Moog synthesizer commanded an entire room and took 1 week to set up before recording sessions. I'll tell you more about this in my upcoming Innovation and New Technologies lecture. Our creative process was compelling. We might start a song by improvising on basic instruments like hand-carved wooden flutes. Then the idea would develop and expand when one of the musicians, let's say the drummer, would play a primitive-sounding beat. Next, the bass player might add an element. He was followed by one of the horn players. For example, Benny Maupin would play something on a bass clarinet or on one of his unusual saxophones like the Manzello, high above the normal range of the instrument, which often sounded like he was screaming. And then the trumpet player might add trills, going back and forth between two notes. Then I might join in on the Fender Rhodes piano. To some, that might sound chaotic, but for the musicians, this was a response to real feelings and a determined search for expression outside the unexpected. It was part of the story, the creativity, and the raw energy we built. In 20th century terms, this relates to the beginning of the contemporary classical era and the seismic genius of Russian composer Igor Stravinsky, who was also selected for a Harvard University Norton professorship. A rule breaker, he had a heavy-duty effect on me and on Mwandishi. I love Stravinsky's music, Firebird, Petrushka, Ebony Concerto, and especially the Sacre du Printemps, the Rite of Spring, which is one of my all-time favorite musical creations. It's astounding how he composed this work, especially considering the other music that was written at that same time. The Rite of Spring was a complex orchestral work and ballet written for the 1933 Paris season of Sergei Diaghilev's Ballet Russe, and choreographed by Vaslav Nijinsky. When first performed, the experimental unorthodox combination caused an uproar, and the audience staged a near riot. The costumes were considered outrageous, and the eccentric story of pagan sacrifice created quite a scandal. It's now considered to be a masterpiece and is one of the most important and influential musical works of the 20th century, with countless artists citing it as a seminal listening moment in their creative lives and endeavors. I highly recommend a PBS Keeping Score program by the American conductor and pianist and composer Michael Tilson Thomas, who not only explains the process of creating this miraculous work of art, but brings it to life in the most infectious manner. The courage, enlightenment, and forward thinking of Stravinsky continues to be an excellent teacher for me and musicians in every artistic genre. However, many teachers have educated and continue to train their students by placing a rule book on an imaginary pedestal and adhering to strict convention. But I believe a master teacher has the wisdom to encourage critical thinking and development outside of the anointed rule book. For the most part, the basic skills-oriented education, the little red schoolhouse programs in our schools, better known as the 3 R's, should be guidelines providing a launching pad for learning and basic development. Rules have no more rigidity than the stem of a sunflower. But that flower allows the blossom to bend and change direction in order to face the sun, which in itself appears to move because of the Earth's rotation. And each rotation establishes what we call a day, and with each day there is constant change. With this reasoning, rules need to be flexible to function within the creative aspect of living as a support for change and new development. Rules support but also encourage new possibilities. And who are the people we study? Certainly not the ones who follow the rules. We study the ones who break the rules and make new rules, right? The rule breakers who offer original realms of investigation and create new conventions, men and women who use their imaginations, obsessions, elbow grease, and ethics to demonstrate what can be accomplished in and outside of the classroom. Anne Sullivan is a perfect model of a master teacher. She was called the miracle worker for a good reason. Her work with Helen Keller as an instructor and companion is legendary. Mahatma Gandhi exemplifies the phrase, "Be the change you wish to see." Albert Einstein, Rosa Parks, Sir Isaac Newton, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Socrates, Nelson Mandela, Nicholas Copernicus, Igor Stravinsky, Harvey Milk, Elvis Presley, Maria Montessori, Jackie Robinson, Sine Saburo Makiguchi, and the transcendentalists Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, all taught by example, were ridiculed for their ethics, but these same beliefs permanently changed the rules. Quote, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptable to change," said Charles Darwin. Two education models I admire are the Khan Academy, a free, not-for-profit global academy accessed on the web, and the Circle School System, which advances the theory that the focus of education should be the lifelong happiness of the learner, the development of the unique personality of each child, with an emphasis on the importance of leading socially contributive lives. So, I believe the time is right to replace the ingrained, firmly fixed rules of how our children receive their education. And I'd like to tell you about a groundbreaking new initiative that I'm involved with, and I believe it could help change the world. I realize that's a pretty ambitious statement. But with the help of UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, where I serve as Goodwill Ambassador, and the Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz, where I've served as the chairman, we're preparing for the challenge. We aim to harness the amazing power of music and the dominant role it plays in the lives of our young people to initiate meaningful changes and transformations in the classroom. Studying and having a love for math, science, and technology has been important to my career as a musician, teacher, mentor, and humanitarian. After many years of performing and research, the ideas and knowledge I accumulated in school became the building blocks of my creativity. There's a beautiful symbiotic relationship between math and music. Rhythm, a time factor, is expressed in whole, half, quarter, eighth, or 16th notes. A time signature is a fraction. In today's society, kids use portable music to study, relax, walk the dog, sleep, think, exercise, communicate, and connect with their peers. And the list goes on. And believe me, I have no idea how they do it. I can't. They were born into a world where multitasking is a basic necessity, right along with food and shelter. This technological development did not exist when our current teaching methods were established. So it makes sense to me to expand the curricula to catch up with our modern habits. Unfortunately, today, many young people show little interest in studying or forging careers in math and science, and it's become a national crisis. Seems like every week there's a news story about the dearth of students desiring a career in these fields. However, I believe the development of a new methodology and teaching tools based on musical concepts has the potential to make a paradigm shift in education, and of great importance, how it's positively received by the youth. Linking music to math and science must be further explored as a solution. And if we succeed, and I have high hopes that we will, then the spark of inspiration and interest will be ignited. We're calling this new project Math, Science, and Music. We plan to gather the gifted, inventive, and visionary, young and old, in education, music, visual arts, business, technology, psychology, literature, math, science, engineering, medicine, and other areas to develop curricula employing and implementing the basic elements of music, including parts of songs and pieces from various genres and everything in between. I've already talked about some of the most brilliant leaders in their fields, such as the imaginative team at Cycling 74, who is creating some really interesting visual programming tools that serve as the creative engine behind thousands of innovative projects in audio, visual media, and physical computing. And revolutionary thinkers such as Parag Chaudhary, a trailblazer who is researching and developing new technologies for musical self-expression and creating intelligent apps for our phones and computers. Our goal is to pilot math, science, and music in the United States public schools in the near future and expand it globally in subsequent years. The future of our planet depends on education, and by blending the human spirit with the advances of technology, we will do everything in our power to break the rules and encourage young people to try something original and alternative that will help them learn math and science skills through something they crave: music. The music education world has been complaining about the lack of government support of music in the schools and the emphasis on math and science at the expense of culture. Unfortunately, bound by state and federally mandated standards, the conventional wisdom in many school districts now dictates that aside from pure enjoyment, music, art, and often physical education have little value for academic excellence. So, in schools across the country, these programs have been removed or relegated to after-school activities. There was once a time where every student had an opportunity to select and learn to play an instrument, but that is no longer the situation. But maybe this is a way to activate the phrase, if you can't beat them, join them, and find a new function for the value of music. It's a win-win situation, and I like that. Personally, I feel that without some connection of the arts, there is little creativity in problem solving or critical thinking. Furthermore, the heart will be missing. Our future scientists and mathematicians will become men and women without souls. Something profound, elegant, and beautiful will be lacking from their core. And with this absence, how will we develop our humanism and our ethics? It's an uphill battle to bring music back into the schools. The artistic community has been reaching out to benefactors to purchase instruments and subsidize after-school programs. The Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz, the jazz educational organization near and dear to my heart, has been tireless for over a quarter of a century, working to bring jazz into the souls and minds of students around the world by providing a national jazz curriculum and a wide variety of programs including jazz in the classroom, blues and jazz, bebop to hip hop, and one of the world's most intensive jazz college programs, the Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz Performance at UCLA, whose students often serve as jazz ambassadors and mentors to international students in small villages and big bustling cities. And every one of our programs is presented free of charge. But unfortunately, this is the exception. All of these programs, and truly everything in life, is made possible through mentoring. In most instances, mentoring is perceived as the sharing of experience, knowledge, and wisdom between generations. But in some instances, it can be a relationship with one of your peers in a way. I've mentioned several celebrated champions, but what about the unsung heroes whose substantive, unrecognized contributions and bravery are confined to oblivion, or the unappreciated and neglected who are ignored and dismissed, but sometimes uncovered in the future, like Vincent van Gogh or Henrietta Lacks? An unheralded jazz pianist whose innovative harmonic approach influenced and opened my eyes to possibilities was one of the latter. His name was Chris Anderson. Chris was self-taught, and like me, born in Chicago. A master of harmony and sensitivity, he was respected by his peers, but it was difficult for him to find work because he was born with a crippling disability. Blind by the age of 20, he also suffered a congenital bone disease, but didn't hamper his creativity. First time I met Chris was in the late 1950s and early 60s when I went to an afternoon jam session run by Joe Siegel, one of the primary promoters of jazz in Chicago. Drummer Elvin Jones, a multi-instrumentalist, Rahsaan Roland Kirk, they both had agreed to be guest artists. So I was naturally looking forward to hearing them. In the middle of the afternoon, Joe introduced Chris, who was going to perform solo. He had a crutch and one eye socket that appeared to be empty and the lids sealed shut. His legs and face were somewhat distorted. Teeth were missing. He was a sight to behold, and I wondered, what was he going to do at the keyboard? When he started to play a ballad called Don't Follow the Crowd, I was thunderstruck, riveted to my seat. Time stood still. He created such beauty that I was in tears. I felt his lush chords with all my senses. Afterwards, he agreed to teach me. I proceeded to study with this harmonic master, and what I learned from him was surprising. He often used imagery when he spoke about harmony, which was interesting because he couldn't see. He connected with nature, water going over pebbles, the whoosh of the wind, a babbling brook, songbirds, the silence of a puffy cloud. References he used to describe feeling through his music. His cinematic approach to harmony originated in the French impressionistic music of Maurice Ravel and Claude Debussy, which had previously influenced jazz in the 20s and the 30s. Over time, some of it was forgotten, but not by Chris. Some of the techniques involved intermelodic movement within a chordal structure and certain voice leading techniques that had been lost over time, not truly explored in modern jazz. And he developed something new by taking older, overlooked ideas, then restructuring and combining them with his current approach. Not exactly like, but similar to what classical composers did with the Gregorian chant Dies Irae. Once I heard Chris play, I was hooked and proceeded to copy and dissect the information and incorporate it into the harmonic expression I've used ever since. This beautiful mentor-disciple relationship has been handed down to younger musicians through me and others, and thus have incorporated Chris's approach into the musical lexicon. If you listen to the recording of Solitude on my album, The Joni Letters, with just me and the bassist, Dave Holland, you'll hear Chris Anderson all over that tune. An important part of the creative process, and perhaps a broader interpretation of breaking the rules, is taking an idea that has been edited out of the vocabulary, rediscovering and restructuring it, an evolution of the original idea. But this reminds me of the earliest interpreters of scratching. They took old, outdated 78 RPM records, applied a new technique, and changed the course of music. Right? Maybe it was serendipity that Chris died just a few days before I won the Grammy Award in February 2008 for Album of the Year. And I'm proud to give him credit for making a contribution to my body of work, which propelled me onto the stage that magical evening. Before we start the Q&A, I'd like to thank all of you for joining me this afternoon. Next week, I'll be discussing cultural diplomacy and the voice of freedom, and I hope to see you again. I think this impression of the late Dean of Scientific Writers, Robert Heinlein, perfectly sums up the spirit of this lecture. I am free, no matter what rules surround me. If I find them tolerable, I'll tolerate them. If I find them too obnoxious, I break them. I'm free because I know that I alone am morally responsible for everything I do. Thank you.